August 28, 1963. 250,000 people stood at the Lincoln Memorial. Martin Luther King delivered "I Have a Dream." The world watched. History was made. But the man who made it all possible, he wasn't allowed to stand on that stage. His name was erased from every photograph. For 50 years, America pretended he didn't exist. Why would the civil rights movement hide its own architect? What was so dangerous about this man that even black leaders wanted him gone? What truth were they so afraid of? His name was Bayard Rustin. He was black. He was brilliant. He was gay. And they tried to bury him because of it. Everything you learned about the March on Washington was incomplete. The most important person in that movement was deliberately erased. Not by white supremacists, by the movement itself. Think about that for a second. The people fighting for freedom decided one man's freedom was too dangerous to acknowledge. They used his genius. They needed his strategies. Then they hid his face and forgot his name. This is the story they didn't want you to know. This is your stolen history. By the end of this video, you'll discover the man who actually organized the March on Washington. Not just attended it, not just spoke at it, created it from nothing. You'll understand why LGBTQ+ rights and civil rights are the same fight. Why homophobia in the black church is a weapon white supremacy used against us. And why hiding Bayard Rustin's story weakened our entire movement. This isn't just history. This is about your church, your family, your community right now. This is about the lie that being gay is against black culture when one of our greatest leaders was gay. This affects how you see your LGBTQ+ children, grandchildren, neighbors today. You'll know exactly how Rustin organized 250,000 people in 8 weeks. You'll see the FBI files that tried to destroy him. You'll learn why Martin Luther King stood by him, even when other black leaders abandoned him. And you'll never see the civil rights movement the same way again. Rustin's genius lives in every protest you've ever attended. His strategies are used today, but somebody decided you shouldn't know his name. Let's change that right now. March 17, 1912, Westchester, Pennsylvania. Bayard Taylor. Rustin was born into a world that would try to crush him twice over. Born black in Jim Crow America. Born gay in a country that criminalized his existence. His mother, Florence, couldn't raise him. His grandparents, Julia and Jennifer Rustin, took him in. They were Quakers. They believed in peace, equality, justice. They taught young Bayard that every human being has divine worth. They didn't know they were raising a revolutionary. Picture Bayard as a young man. Tall, handsome, brilliant mind. Voice like thunder. He could sing tenor so beautifully, he performed with Paul Robeson. He could organize so strategically, he'd make generals jealous. He studied at Wilberforce University, Cheney State Teachers College. He devoured books about Gandhi, about nonviolent resistance, about how oppressed people could fight back without becoming their oppressors. By his 20s, Bayard Rustin wasn't just an activist. He was a philosopher, a strategist, a warrior armed with ideas instead of weapons. In 1947, Rustin participated in the Journey of Reconciliation. This was 16 years before the freedom rides you learned about in school. 16 years. He and other activists rode buses through the South to challenge segregation. They were beaten. They were arrested. Rustin spent 22 days on a chain gang in North Carolina. A chain gang, breaking rocks under the southern sun while guards with rifles watched and waited for an excuse to shoot. But Rustin survived. He always survived. Because he had to. Because the movement needed him. But here's what they don't teach you in those history books. Bayard Rustin was openly living as a gay man in the 1940s and 50s. Do you understand how dangerous that was? This wasn't just Jim Crow segregation. This was the McCarthy era, the Lavender Scare. The government was hunting communists and homosexuals with equal fury. In 1953, President Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10450. It banned gay people from working for the federal government. Over 5,000 people lost their jobs for being sexually deviant. That's what they called it. Sexual deviation. Loving who you loved was a federal offense. And Bayard Rustin, this brilliant black gay man, was trying to organize a movement for freedom, while the FBI tracked his every move. J. Edgar Hoover had a file on Rustin that grew to over 7,500 pages. 7,500 pages. The government spent more time watching Rustin than they spent protecting black people from lynch mobs. Think about that. While black churches burned, while black children died, while black men swung from trees, the FBI was following Bayard Rustin because he dared to love another man. That's America. That's the country we're talking about. In 1953, Rustin made a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was just him living his truth in a world that hated truth. He was in Pasadena, California. He was in a parked car with another man. Police arrested him on a morals charge. That's code. Code for being gay. He was convicted, spent 60 days in jail, and that conviction became a weapon. For the next 30 years, segregationists would wave that arrest record like a flag. Look, they'd say the civil rights movement is led by perverts and communists. The conviction was supposed to destroy him. Instead, it proved he couldn't be broken. Then came 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. The Montgomery bus boycott began. And Martin Luther King Jr., just 26 years old, found himself leading a movement he didn't fully understand yet. King was brilliant. King was brave. But King didn't know how to organize 40,000 black people to stop riding buses for 381 days. He didn't know how to structure a mass movement. He didn't know how to train people in nonviolence. He needed help. He needed Bayard Rustin. Rustin flew to Montgomery in February 1956. He walked into King's house and saw chaos. Good intentions everywhere, but no strategy. Rustin changed that overnight. He taught King about Gandhi, about how India won independence from Britain without firing a shot, about how oppressed people could use their own suffering as a weapon, about how to turn pain into power. King listened, King learned, and the Montgomery bus boycott became the blueprint for everything that came after. But here's where it gets painful. Rustin was in Montgomery for weeks, organizing, strategizing, making the boycott work. Then Adam Clayton Powell Jr. showed up. Powell was a black congressman from New York, powerful man, respected man. And Powell told Martin Luther King Jr. to fire Rustin, or Powell would claim that King and Rustin were having an affair. Read that again. A black leader threatened to destroy another black leader with a homophobic lie, to force out the one man making the movement successful. That's what homophobia does. It doesn't just hurt gay people, it weakens everyone. King caved. Under pressure, he distanced himself from Rustin, sent him back to New York. It would be years before their relationship fully healed. Rustin understood. He knew the movement was bigger than his feelings. He knew that if his presence gave segregationists ammunition, he had to step back. So he did. He went to New York and worked behind the scenes, organizing, planning, preparing for the moment when the movement would need him so desperately they'd have no choice but to call him back. That moment came in January 1963. A. Philip Randolph, head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, proposed a march on Washington, D.C., a mass demonstration to demand jobs and freedom. The big civil rights organizations met to discuss it. NAACP, Urban League, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Congress of Racial Equality, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They all agreed a march was needed, but they looked at the logistics and said impossible. Too dangerous. Can't organize that many people. Can't control the crowd. Can't prevent violence. Too risky. Randolph listened to their fears. Then he said 5 words that changed history. I know one man who can do it. Bayard Rustin. The room exploded. Roy Wilkins from the NAACP stood up furious. We cannot have a homosexual organizing this march. It will destroy our credibility. Senator Strom Thurmond will use him to discredit us. We need someone respectable. Rustin isn't respectable. Those were the words, said out loud, by black leaders, about a black man who had sacrificed more for freedom than most of them ever would. But Randolph held firm. He was 73 years old, a giant of the movement. And he said, if Bayard Rustin doesn't organize this march, there won't be a march. You want 100,000 people in Washington. You want national attention. You want to pressure Kennedy to pass civil rights legislation. Then you need the best organizer in America, and that's Bayard Rustin. Take him or leave him. They took him, reluctantly, with conditions, with whispers. But they took him. It was June 1963. Rustin had 8 weeks to do what everyone said couldn't be done. Organize the largest protest in American history. From a basement office in Harlem, working 18 to 20 hours a day, Bayard Rustin became a one-man army. He had a phone, a desk, a typewriter, and a mind that could see 10 moves ahead, like a chess grandmaster. He didn't have computers, didn't have email, didn't have social media. He had determination, he had genius, and he had a vision of 100,000 people standing together, demanding justice. First problem: transportation. How do you move 100,000 people from across America to Washington, D.C. safely? Remember, this is 1963. Black people traveling through the South risked their lives. Rustin chartered 2,000 buses, 21 special trains, multiple flights. He coordinated pickup locations in every major city. He created schedules down to the minute. He made sure every bus had a leader, every train car had marshals, every group had emergency contacts. He turned a mass movement into a military operation. Second problem: crowd control. What happens when 100,000 people gather and segregationists try to start violence? What if police provoke the crowd? What if one fight breaks out and the whole thing becomes a riot? Rustin recruited and trained 2,000 volunteer marshals. He taught them nonviolent crowd control techniques, how to spot trouble before it starts, how to de-escalate tension, how to protect marchers without using violence. These marshals wore white sashes so everyone could see them. They became the nervous system of the march. Third problem: basic human needs. Where do 100,000 people use the bathroom? Where do they get water on a hot August day? What if someone gets hurt? Rustin ordered 292 portable toilets, installed 21 water stations around the National Mall, set up 8 first aid stations staffed with volunteer doctors and nurses. He arranged for 250,000 sandwiches to be prepared and distributed. He thought of everything, every single detail. Because if people got sick, if the toilets overflowed, if there wasn't enough water, the media would call it a disaster, and the movement would be humiliated. Fourth problem: security and cooperation. The Washington, D.C. police force in 1963 was not friendly to black people. Many officers were openly racist, but Rustin needed them, needed their cooperation, needed them to not interfere. So he met with police commanders. He showed them his plans. He proved the march would be peaceful, organized, controlled. He convinced them that helping was in their interest, and somehow, incredibly, the police agreed to cooperate. That's the power of Rustin's strategic mind. He could turn potential enemies into reluctant allies. Fifth problem: the program itself. Who speaks? In what order? For how long? Rustin knew that if speeches went too long, people would leave. If the wrong person spoke first, the energy would die. If there was no structure, chaos would take over. So he created a minute-by-minute schedule. Music at this time, prayer at that time, speakers in this order. Each speech limited to 7 minutes. Even Martin Luther King Jr. got 7 minutes. Of course, King spoke for 16 minutes. When you're delivering, I have a dream. 7 minutes isn't enough, but Rustin built in flexibility. He anticipated everything. Sixth problem: media coverage. What's the point of 100,000 people marching if nobody sees it? Rustin coordinated with every major television network. He made sure cameras were positioned perfectly. He made sure the sound system worked, so speeches could be heard clearly. He turned the March on Washington into the first nationally televised mass protest. Millions of Americans watched from their living rooms. They saw black people and white people together. They saw dignity. They saw power. They saw the future. And it scared the hell out of segregationists. August 28, 1963. 5 in the morning. Bayard Rustin was already at the Lincoln Memorial, checking every detail, testing microphones, talking to marshals, making sure water stations were full. He had barely slept in weeks. His eyes were red. His voice was hoarse. But his mind was sharp. Everything had to be perfect. By 11 in the morning, the crowd started arriving. Buses rolled in from every direction. Trains emptied at Union Station. People walked from all over Washington. And they kept coming, and coming, and coming. By noon, it was clear this wasn't going to be 100,000 people. This was something bigger, something historic. The crowd swelled. 150,000, 200,000, 250,000. 250,000 human beings standing together in the summer heat, demanding freedom. The largest protest America had ever seen. And not one arrest, not one act of violence, not one moment of chaos. Perfect execution, military precision. Rustin stood backstage with his walkie-talkie solving problems in real time. Sound system cutting out fixed. Speaker running late, adjusted. Crowd overflowing past barriers, marshals repositioned. He was the conductor of a symphony played by 250,000 instruments. Then Martin Luther King Jr. stepped to the microphone. Rustin watched from the side. King started reading his prepared remarks about the promissory note America had written to black people. A check that came back marked insufficient funds, strong words, good speech. But something was missing. Then Mahalia Jackson, standing near King, called out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." King looked at his notes, looked at the crowd, and set the notes aside. "I have a dream," he said. And the world changed. King spoke for 16 minutes. About his dream that one day his 4 little children would be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. About his dream that former slaves and former slave owners could sit together at the table of brotherhood. About his dream that justice would roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. The crowd was transfixed. America was transfixed. History was being made. And Bayard Rustin, the man who built the stage, who gathered the crowd, who made the moment possible, stood in the shadows, invisible, erased, forgotten before the day even ended. When the march ended and the crowds dispersed, media coverage focused on Martin Luther King Jr. Rightfully so. The speech was magnificent. But in the news reports, in the photographs, in the official accounts, Rustin's name appeared rarely. When it did appear, it was buried. A. Philip Randolph got credit as the march's director. King got credit as the speaker. But the man who actually organized every single detail, the man who turned an impossible dream into reality, he was cropped out of photos, pushed to the background, mentioned in passing, if mentioned at all. Why? Because civil rights leaders made a calculation. They decided that acknowledging Rustin's role would give ammunition to segregationists. Strom Thurmond had already read Rustin's arrest record into the congressional record. Southern newspapers were already calling the march a communist homosexual conspiracy. If the movement celebrated Rustin publicly, if they put his face front and center, the narrative would shift from "I have a dream" to "the march was organized by a gay man." They couldn't risk it, so they erased him. They used him, then they erased him, and Rustin accepted it. Because he believed the cause was bigger than his recognition. Because he believed freedom mattered more than fame. Because he was willing to be forgotten if it meant his people could be free. That's the sacrifice. That's the cost of being black and gay in 1963. You can change the world, but you can't take credit for it. But listen carefully. This erasure didn't just hurt Bayard Rustin. It hurt everyone. It sent a message to every LGBTQ+ black person in America. Your contributions don't count. Your genius doesn't matter. You can work, you can sacrifice, you can bleed for the movement, but you can never be celebrated. Stay in the shadows. Hide who you are. Pretend. Or be destroyed. That message poisoned the black community for generations. It made families reject their gay children. It made churches preach hate. It made young people kill themselves rather than come out. The erasure of Bayard Rustin wasn't just about one man. It was about all of us. And here's the part that should make you furious. This wasn't the first time. Bayard Rustin wasn't the only black LGBTQ+ leader who built the movement and then got erased. This was a pattern, a system, a deliberate strategy of using queer black brilliance and then hiding it. Let me show you. James Baldwin, born 1924 in Harlem, New York, grew up in poverty. Stepfather was a preacher who abused him. Baldwin escaped into books, into writing, into truth. By his 20s, he was living in Paris because America was suffocating him. Too black for white people, too gay for black people, too honest for everyone. But Baldwin kept writing. The Fire Next Time, Notes of a Native Son, Giovanni's Room, books that told the truth about racism and sexuality in language so beautiful it made people weep. Baldwin didn't just write about civil rights. He articulated the intellectual foundation for why racism was a moral disease destroying America's soul. Baldwin spoke at civil rights meetings. He advised Martin Luther King Jr. He debated white intellectuals on national television and demolished their arguments. In 1965, he debated William F. Buckley Jr. at Cambridge University on the question, "Is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro?" Baldwin spoke for 45 minutes without notes. He traced the history of American racism from slavery, through lynching, through segregation. He proved that America was built on black suffering. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Even people who disagreed with him stood up because the truth was undeniable. But here's what happened to Baldwin's legacy. In school, they teach his essays about race. They quote his words about white fragility before that term even existed. But they whisper about his sexuality. They downplay his novels about gay love. They sanitize him. They turn him into a respectable race man instead of the revolutionary queer prophet he actually was. Baldwin himself said it clearly, "I am not a nigger. I am a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it." The same is true about faggot. He understood that all oppressions are connected, that you can't be free if you're only fighting one form of injustice. But the movement didn't want to hear that. They wanted him to talk about race and shut up about sexuality. Baldwin spent most of his adult life in France because America broke his heart. He died in 1987 at age 63. Lung cancer. He was buried in Harlem, the place he loved, and the place that couldn't fully love him back. Today's scholars study Baldwin. Universities teach Baldwin. But your grandmother probably didn't know he was gay. Your pastor probably doesn't mention it when quoting his words. They took his genius and hid his truth, just like they did to Rustin. Pauli Murray, born 1910 in Baltimore, Maryland, assigned female at birth but struggled with gender identity their entire life. Murray called it in-betweenness. Today we'd recognize Murray as non-binary or transmasculine. But in 1910 there was no language for that, no community, just confusion and pain. Murray tried to pass as male in college, tried to convince doctors to perform gender-affirming surgery, was rejected, was told there was something wrong with them, spent a lifetime feeling trapped in a body that didn't match their soul. But Pauli Murray didn't let that pain stop them. Murray applied to University of North Carolina for graduate school in 1938, was rejected for being black, wrote a letter challenging the rejection that was so brilliant it got national attention. That letter became a blueprint for legal challenges to segregation. Murray went to Howard University School of Law instead. Graduated top of the class. Wanted to continue graduate work at Harvard. Harvard rejected Murray for being female. So Murray took those rejections and turned them into fuel. Murray developed a legal theory called Jane Crow. The idea that sexism and racism weren't separate oppressions, but intertwined systems that hurt black women specifically. This was 1940s. Decades before Kimberlé Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. Murray was already living it, theorizing it, fighting it. Murray's legal writings influenced Thurgood Marshall's arguments in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, the case that ended school segregation. Murray's fingerprints are all over that victory, but nobody knew Murray's name. In 1965, Murray co-founded the National Organization for Women with Betty Friedan, fighting for women's rights while still fighting for civil rights. In 1977, at age 66, Pauli Murray became the first black woman ordained as an Episcopal priest, broke two barriers at once, gender and race, gave the first communion to the grandmother who raised them. Full circle moment. Murray died in 1985. For decades was forgotten. Only recently have historians begun to recover Murray's story, to recognize the legal genius, the activism, the courage of living authentically when the world had no space for who Murray was. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, years later, cited Pauli Murray's legal work as foundational to her own fight for gender equality. Ginsburg won cases at the Supreme Court using arguments Murray developed. But Murray never got the credit during their lifetime. UC Berkeley School of Law renamed itself Pauli Murray College in 2024. Finally, recognition. But generations of law students graduated never knowing that a black non-binary person architected the legal framework for their rights. That's erasure. That's theft. That's what happens when movements decide some people's identities are too complicated, too uncomfortable, too dangerous to acknowledge. Alan Locke, born 1885 in Philadelphia, first Black Rhodes Scholar in 1907, studied philosophy at Oxford, came back to America and joined Howard University as a professor for 40 years. Openly gay in an era when that meant social death. Had a long-term relationship with another man, never hid it from people who knew him, but never broadcast it either because he wanted to live. Locke believed in something he called cultural pluralism, the idea that diversity makes society stronger, not weaker. That different cultures, different perspectives, different identities aren't threats, but treasures. In 1925, Locke edited and published The New Negro, an anthology of black writing, art, poetry, philosophy that became the manifesto of the Harlem Renaissance. Locke mentored Langston Hughes, mentored Zora Neale Hurston, mentored an entire generation of black artists and intellectuals. He taught them that black culture was beautiful, valuable, worthy of celebration. That they didn't have to apologize for being black, didn't have to imitate white culture, could create something new and powerful and distinctly their own. The Harlem Renaissance changed American culture forever. Jazz, blues, poetry, visual art, literature, all of it exploded out of Harlem in the 1920s and shaped everything that came after. And at the center of it all was Alain Locke, this gay black philosopher who believed black people were the new Negro, not defined by oppression, but by creativity and dignity and power. But Howard University, the historically black institution where Locke taught for 4 decades, never fully celebrated him during his lifetime, never made him a central figure. Why? Because he was gay. Because respectable black academia in the 1930s and 40s couldn't handle a gay man as its intellectual leader. Locke died in 1954, poor, largely forgotten outside academic circles. His contributions to the Harlem Renaissance minimized in popular memory. You learn about the Harlem Renaissance in school. You learn about Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. But Alain Locke, the man who made it possible, the man who theorized it, organized it, funded it. Footnote, if that. They took his movement and erased his name, because acknowledging him meant acknowledging that a gay man was the father of black cultural pride, and that was too threatening. Audre Lorde, born 1934 in New York City to Caribbean immigrant parents, grew up legally blind, could barely see, but she could feel, could think, could write poetry that burned like fire. Lorde called herself a black lesbian mother warrior poet, didn't hide a single part of her identity, didn't apologize for any of it. In the 1960s and 70s, when everyone wanted you to pick one identity, one struggle, Lorde said no. I am all of these things at once. You will deal with all of me, or none of me. Lorde joined the civil rights movement, joined the feminist movement, joined the gay rights movement, and got rejected by all of them. White feminists told her she was too focused on race. Black nationalists told her she was too focused on gender and sexuality. Gay rights activists focused on white gay men and ignored black lesbians. Lorde stood in the middle of all these movements and said, "You are all wrong." Liberation isn't about one group getting free while others stay oppressed. Liberation is everyone getting free together, or nobody getting free at all. In 1984, Lorde published Sister Outsider, a collection of essays that became the foundation of intersectional feminism. She wrote about the erotic as power, about how women's pleasure and creativity had been suppressed by patriarchy, about how black women experience both racism and sexism, and how those oppressions compound each other. She wrote the essay, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House," arguing that you can't use oppressive systems to achieve liberation. You have to build something entirely new, revolutionary ideas, ideas that shaped decades of activism, but when Lorde was alive, marginalized. White feminists tokenized her, invited her to speak, but didn't center her ideas. Black churches called her dangerous, told parents to keep their daughters away from her. She was too radical, too queer, too honest, too much. Lorde was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1978, underwent a mastectomy, wrote about it in the cancer journals, wrote about how illness and healing are political, how the medical system treats black women's pain differently, how vulnerability can be power. She lived with cancer for 14 years, kept writing, kept fighting, kept telling the truth, even when the truth made everyone uncomfortable. Lorde died in 1992 at age 58. The cancer finally won, but her words didn't die. Sister Outsider is taught in universities now, gender studies departments, African American studies, women's studies. Her quote, "Your silence will not protect you," is on protest signs. Her ideas about intersectionality are mainstream now, but when she was alive, she was poor, struggled to get published, struggled to get recognition, died knowing that the world would eventually catch up to her, but probably not in her lifetime. That's the cost. That's what Black LGBTQ+ visionaries pay. They give everything, change everything, and die before the world says, "Thank you." Do you see it now? The pattern Bayard Rustin organized the March on Washington. Erased. James Baldwin articulated the moral case for civil rights. Sanitized. Pauli Murray created the legal framework for equality. Forgotten. Alain Locke birthed the Harlem Renaissance. Footnoted. Audre Lorde developed intersectional theory. Marginalized until after death. Every single time a Black LGBTQ+ person achieved greatness, the same thing happened. They were used when convenient, hidden when respectable, erased after death, rediscovered generations later when it was safe to acknowledge them. This wasn't coincidence. This was strategy. This was policy. This was a deliberate choice made by movements that claimed to be about freedom, but couldn't handle all kinds of freedom. White supremacy taught Black people that to be respectable, we had to reject our LGBTQ+ members. That queerness was white decadence. That homosexuality was against African culture. Complete lies. All lies. But the lies worked. Here's the truth they don't want you to know. Pre-colonial Africa had gender non-conforming people, had same-sex relationships, had multiple gender categories. The Zulu had a tradition of female husbands. The Yoruba recognized multiple genders beyond male and female. The Akan people had spiritual leaders who didn't fit binary gender categories. Homosexuality and gender fluidity existed in African cultures for thousands of years. Then European colonizers arrived, brought Christianity, brought Victorian morality, brought laws criminalizing sodomy, brought the idea that there are only two genders and only one acceptable form of sexuality. Slavery amplified this. Enslaved people were forced into heterosexual breeding, treated like livestock. Families were separated, destroyed, traumatized around sexuality and reproduction. After slavery ended, Black people faced a new challenge. Prove you're civilized. Prove you're respectable. Prove you deserve equality. And respectability meant copying white middle-class values, nuclear family, heterosexual marriage, gender roles. Anything outside that was dangerous could be used against the entire race. So Black communities policed sexuality, rejected anyone who didn't fit, and in doing so threw away some of their greatest minds. The Black church became the enforcer. Sunday after Sunday, preachers called homosexuality an abomination. Youth groups taught that being gay means going to hell. Families disowned children who came out. LGBTQ+ Black youth faced conversion therapy beatings, homelessness, suicide. All in the name of respectability. All because white supremacy convinced Black people that to be free, they had to oppress their own. That's the trap. That's the weapon. And it worked for decades. Still works today in too many churches, too many families, too many communities. But here's what that cost us. We lost Bayard Rustin's full brilliance because he had to hide. We lost James Baldwin's complete voice because he had to leave the country. We lost Pauli Murray's leadership because they couldn't fit into male or female boxes. We lost Alain Locke's legacy because respectable academia couldn't handle a gay intellectual. We lost Audre Lorde's wisdom because movements wanted single-issue activists, not complex humans. That theft weakened us, made us smaller, made us less powerful, made us less free. Because you cannot be truly liberated while oppressing your own. Now let me show you exactly how they suppressed these stories, how the system worked to erase Black LGBTQ+ contributions. This wasn't passive forgetting. This was active destruction. Multiple mechanisms working together to make sure you never knew these names, never learned these stories, never understood that queer Black people built the freedom you enjoy today. First mechanism: physical and social destruction. In the 1950s, the United States government launched what historians call the Lavender Scare. You learned about the Red Scare, hunting communists. But the Lavender Scare, that's been erased too. In 1953, President Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10450. It mandated that federal employees be investigated for sexual perversion. Translation: being gay was grounds for immediate termination. Over 5,000 federal workers were fired between 1953 and 1961, not for incompetence, not for disloyalty, for loving the wrong people. The FBI created a program called the Sex Deviates Program. Agents tracked known homosexuals, built files, interviewed neighbors, co-workers, family members, created lists of gay bars, conducted surveillance, entrapped people in bathrooms and parks, arrested them on morals charges. These arrests weren't about law and order, they were weapons. Once you had a morals charge on your record, you couldn't get government jobs, couldn't get security clearance, struggled to find employment anywhere. You were marked, destroyed. That's what happened to Bayard Rustin in 1953, arrested in Pasadena, California, for being in a parked car with another man, convicted of lewd conduct, sentenced to 60 days in jail. That conviction followed him for 30 years. Segregationists loved it. Senator Strom Thurmond stood on the Senate floor in August 1963, right before the March on Washington, and read Rustin's arrest record into the congressional record. Called him a communist pervert. Said the march was a conspiracy to destroy America. Newspapers picked it up, spread the story, tried to discredit the entire civil rights movement by linking it to homosexuality. That's why civil rights leaders wanted Rustin hidden, not because they personally hated him, though some did, but because his existence gave ammunition to enemies. So they made a calculation. Use his genius, but hide his face. Let him organize, but don't let him take credit. Police raids on gay bars happen constantly. Stonewall in 1969 gets remembered because people finally fought back. But raids happened every week in cities across America. Police would storm into bars, turn on lights, check IDs, arrest people for wearing clothing that didn't match their assigned gender. That was illegal in many states. Men had to wear at least 3 pieces of male clothing. Women had to wear at least 3 pieces of female clothing. Police would literally count your buttons and zippers and arrest you if you didn't comply. People lost jobs, lost families, lost lives, and nobody cared. LGBTQ+ people weren't considered worthy of protection. Within Black communities, the violence was different, but equally devastating. Families disowned children, churches expelled members, youth were sent to conversion therapy, beaten, told demons possessed them, prayed over until they confessed to being fixed. Many killed themselves. Suicide rates among LGBTQ+ Black youth have always been high. Still are. Because when your family, your church, your community tells you that being yourself is sinful evil, disgusting, what do you do? Where do you go? Some survived by hiding, marrying someone they didn't love, living double lives, dying slowly inside. Others left, moved to big cities, cut ties with families, chose survival over belonging. That's what Baldwin did. Moved to France, chose exile over erasure. The social cost was isolation. Bayard Rustin, James Baldwin, Pauli Murray, Alain Locke, Audre Lorde. They all lived with constant loneliness. Even when surrounded by people, they were alone. Because they couldn't be fully known, couldn't be fully loved, couldn't share all of themselves without risking destruction. That's the human cost of homophobia. Not just the laws and the arrests, the loneliness, the silence, the pretending, the dying inside while everyone thinks you're fine. Second mechanism, legal suppression. Sodomy laws existed in every state until 2003. Think about that. 2003. Not ancient history, your lifetime. These laws made same-sex intimacy a crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Police used these laws selectively, targeted activists, targeted people they wanted to control. Bayard Rustin's 1953 arrest was under California's sodomy law. The law didn't just criminalize behavior, it criminalized identity. If you were gay, you were a criminal by definition. Employment discrimination was legal everywhere until 2020. 2 years ago, as of this recording, you could be fired for being gay in most states. No legal recourse, no protection. Bayard Rustin struggled to find stable employment outside activism. Brilliant mind, decades of experience. But employers saw the arrest record and said no. LGBTQ+ people had to hide at work, pretend to be straight, make up fake spouses, live in constant fear that someone would find out and destroy their careers. Censorship laws banned LGBTQ+ content from being mailed or published. The Comstock laws from the 1870s defined homosexual materials as obscene. Police confiscated James Baldwin's novel, Giovanni's Room, from bookstores. Libraries refused to stock Audre Lorde's poetry. Teachers were fired for assigning LGBTQ+ authors. The Hays Code in Hollywood prohibited positive portrayals of homosexuality in films until 1968. If a gay character appeared, they had to be either tragic or villainous, never happy, never successful, never admirable. The message was clear. Queer people don't deserve happy endings. Military exclusion meant LGBTQ+ people were dishonorably discharged, lost benefits, faced public shame. Veterans who had served their country were kicked out and stripped of everything they'd earned. Don't ask, don't tell policy lasted until 2011. You could serve, you could die for your country, but you couldn't be yourself. Thousands of brilliant service members were destroyed, careers ended, lives ruined, for loving someone. Marriage was illegal for same-sex couples until 2015. Obergefell versus Hodges. 10 years ago. You couldn't marry the person you loved, couldn't make medical decisions if they got sick, couldn't inherit their property, couldn't adopt children together, couldn't file taxes together. Your relationship had zero legal recognition. If your partner of 30 years died, their biological family could show up and take everything. Kick you out of the home you built together, and you had no legal standing to stop them. That's what Bayard Rustin faced. Had a partner, Walter Nagel, but couldn't marry him. When Rustin died in 1987, the obituaries called Nagel a close friend. Not partner, not love of his life. Friend. Erasure even in death. After Rustin's 1953 arrest, segregationists introduced bills to ban sexual perverts from working in civil rights organizations. Wanted to make it illegal for gay people to organize protests. Senator Strom Thurmond led the charge. Read Rustin's arrest record into the congressional record in 1963 specifically to destroy the March on Washington before it happened. The legal system wasn't neutral. It was weaponized against LGBTQ+ activists, used to silence them, control them, erase them. Third mechanism, educational erasure. Textbooks sanitized history, removed LGBTQ+ identities from historical figures. Rustin got mentioned occasionally as an organizer, never as a gay man. James Baldwin taught as a black writer. Sexuality erased or minimized. Pauli Murray's gender identity completely invisible until the 2010s. Alain Locke's role in the Harlem Renaissance downplayed. Audre Lorde's lesbianism treated as irrelevant to her work when it was central to everything she wrote. No promo homo laws in several states explicitly banned teaching LGBTQ+ topics in schools. Alabama, Texas, Louisiana. Other states had similar policies. Teachers couldn't mention that historical figures were gay, couldn't discuss LGBTQ+ contributions, couldn't assign books with LGBTQ+ characters. Teachers who violated these policies were fired. Schools that included LGBTQ+ content lost funding. The message to students was clear. These people don't exist. Their lives don't matter. Their stories aren't worth knowing. Curriculum design focused on respectable civil rights leaders. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, all deserving of recognition. But the curriculum was carefully constructed to highlight certain people and hide others. Units on the March on Washington mention King's speech, rarely mention Rustin's organization. Harlem Renaissance lessons focus on Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. Ignore Alain Locke's role. Women's rights lessons teach about Betty Friedan. Skip over the fact that Pauli Murray co-founded NOW. Black studies and queer studies were kept separate in universities, the intersection rarely explored, as if black LGBTQ+ people didn't exist. Religious education in black churches actively taught that homosexuality was an abomination. Sunday school lessons about Sodom and Gomorrah. Youth groups teaching that being gay meant going to hell. Conversion therapy promoted as loving intervention. LGBTQ+ youth in black churches faced constant messages that they were broken, sinful, destined for damnation. Many internalized this, spent years hating themselves. Some didn't survive. Church became a place of trauma instead of healing, and the theology was wrong. Completely wrong. Sodom wasn't destroyed for homosexuality. Ezekiel 16:49 says clearly that Sodom's sin was arrogance and not helping the poor. But bad theology backed by institutional power is hard to challenge. The generational impact is staggering. Your parents learned civil rights in school. They learned about Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. But they were never taught that a gay man made that dream possible. Your grandparents lived through the civil rights era, attended churches, participated in movements, but never knew that LGBTQ+ people were leading the charge. 3 generations grew up not knowing Bayard Rustin's name, not knowing James Baldwin was gay, not knowing Pauli Murray's gender struggle, not knowing Alain Locke created the Harlem Renaissance, not knowing Audre Lorde's intersectional brilliance. That's not accident, that's policy. Deliberate suppression of truth to maintain a false narrative about who deserves recognition. 4th mechanism, media manipulation. News coverage of the March on Washington focused almost entirely on Martin Luther King Jr. Deservedly so, in many ways. The I Have a Dream speech was transformative, but the New York Times coverage barely mentioned Rustin. Life magazine did a photo spread. Rustin appeared in background shots, uncaptioned, anonymous. TV broadcasts showed the speeches, but not the organization behind them. The logistics that made it possible were invisible. Rustin's role buried. When the 10-year anniversary came in 1973, retrospectives focused on King. 20-year anniversary, same thing. 50-year anniversary in 2013, finally some recognition for Rustin, but too little too late. Segregationist media called Rustin a communist pervert. Mainstream media ignored his sexuality and minimized his role. Black media celebrated the march, but avoided mentioning Rustin's sexuality. Nobody told the full truth. Truth would have required acknowledging that the civil rights movement had complicated heroes, that freedom fighters came in all identities, that liberation couldn't be compartmentalized. But that truth was too challenging. So media outlets across the political spectrum chose partial truth over full truth. Hollywood whitewashing continued for decades. Civil rights films focused on straight heroes. Selma in 2014 included Rustin as a minor character. Got some things right, but couldn't fully explore his story. The Butler in 2013, Malcolm X in 1992, Mississippi Burning in 1988, all focused on straight narratives. When LGBTQ+ characters appeared in films, they were usually white. Black LGBTQ+ stories were considered unmarketable, not universal, too niche. Translation studios didn't think white audiences would watch movies about black gay people, so those stories didn't get made. Only in 2023 did Netflix release Rustin, a film finally centering his story. 60 years after the March on Washington. 60 years of erasure before Hollywood told the truth. Documentary exclusion was systematic. PBS Eyes on the Prize. In 1987, the definitive civil rights documentary series gave Rustin minimal coverage, mentioned him briefly, didn't explore his story. March on Washington documentaries focused on speeches, not logistics. Rustin's strategic genius remained invisible. Even documentaries trying to tell complete stories couldn't seem to include the gay black man who made everything possible. Why? Because documentary makers, even well-intentioned ones, absorbed the same cultural bias that said LGBTQ+ stories are separate from civil rights stories. They're not. They never were. They're the same story. Obituaries erased relationships. When Bayard Rustin died in 1987, most obituaries mentioned his civil rights work. Few mentioned Walter Nagel, his partner of 10 years. Those that did called Nagel a close friend or companion. Not partner. Not love of his life. The relationship that sustained Rustin through his final years was sanitized into friendship. Same thing happened with Alan Locke, with Audre Lorde. Their obituaries acknowledged professional achievements, but erased personal lives. As if love and partnership and intimacy weren't relevant to who these people were. As if you could separate their identities from their work. Quote manipulation happened constantly. Rustin's quotes about justice and freedom circulated widely. Inspirational memes, protest signs, speeches. But his quotes about sexuality and the intersection of oppressions were forgotten. Rustin said in 1986, 25, maybe 30 years from now, the black community will be thanking the gay community for all the grief we've given them. He knew these struggles were connected, but that quote didn't fit the sanitized version of his legacy. So it disappeared. Audre Lorde's quote, "Your silence will not protect you," is famous. Her quotes about lesbian sexuality as power rarely shared. Baldwin's quotes about race are taught in schools. His quotes about loving men, hidden. Imagine organizing the biggest protest in American history, changing laws that free millions, building a movement that transforms a nation. And when you die, newspapers call your life partner your friend. Your sexuality is treated as embarrassing detail instead of core identity. Your full story is too complicated, so they simplify it. That's not journalism. That's not history. That's erasure. That's violence. And it happened to Bayard Rustin, happened to James Baldwin, happened to Pauli Murray, Alan Locke, Audre Lorde. Happened to countless others whose names we still don't know, because the erasure was complete.